All right, welcome back. Picking up from last time where we left off, we have got our very initial repository created. We've added a couple of files or a file, and so now we're ready to continue on. I mentioned in the introduction that we're going to be using Maven as our build tool, which is one of the common build tools for Java projects, and Gradle is the other common build tool for Java projects. They're very similar. They have a lot of similarities in terms of the functionality they provide. So I'm going to use Maven, and like if you just Google search it, you can find the Maven homepage, no problem. So this describes more information about it. Maven uses something called POM files, pom.xml files. XML, like from the early 2000s, good vibes from doing development back then. XML has kind of fallen out of favor for pretty much everything, except for POM files. So yeah, welcome to enterprise development, still running code from the early 2000s. So we'll go ahead and new POM file. I copy pasted this very minimal POM content, and I'll drop it in here, and I'll format it. So we've got, it starts and ends with project. So this file will define our Maven project, and the first line, or I guess the second line, is the model version. This tells Maven what version of XML we're using to define our project. Pretty much always you'll see version 4 in here. The next line is the group ID. These three lines are configurable, and they depend on what our project is. I'm going to leave this open because I'm going to click on load here in a minute. So for group ID, you can put anything in here. It's normal for this to look like a domain, but backwards, kind of like it does here, mycompany.com. So they have the group ID set to com.mycompany.app. So I do plan on having a domain, so I'm going to call mine com.tutorial API. You can put anything in here. If you don't have a domain, just put your username in here or tutorial API in here. It doesn't matter too much, but we're going to use these same group IDs kind of throughout all of our project here. Typically, your artifact ID would represent the project that you're working on, and then the group ID would represent the company that you're working for. So, right, it's like if Tutorial API was a company and it had a domain, tutorialapi.com, then that would make sense as a group ID. And then your artifact ID would be the project within the company. So, in our case, we're building an API for Rapid API, so we could call it something like Rapid API, project or something like that. I'm just gonna be generic and just call it Tutorial API. So it's not that important. This artifact is, we'll see it in a few places, but this is just our parent POM, and I'll talk more about the hierarchy of POMs and things like that as we go along, but I'll just call it Tutorial API for now. Version I'm going to change to 1.0.0 snapshot. So I'm going to use semantic versioning, where the first digit is the major release, the second digit is the minor release, and then the third digit is the patch release. And dash snapshot is a Maven term indicating that the release hasn't been cut yet. It's not a final release. It's in progress. It's still being worked. And we'll leave this snapshot until we're ready to make our official 1.0 release. Since we're just playing around, like this version doesn't matter that much. Like we could call it 0.0.0 snapshot if we wanted to, and have our first release like a 0.0.1 or something. If we were going to have alphas and betas and all that stuff. So I'm just going to start it at 1.0.0 snapshot, and then we'll go from there. So now that we have a complete POM, or a working POM, that's not necessarily complete in terms of what we're going to put in here, but it's fully functional just with this small amount of information. I can click Load Maven Project, And IntelliJ has recognized this POM and recognizes that we're now like in a Maven project and is ready to build everything for us with Maven. I can also run Maven from the command line. I showed last time my Maven version, and I've got MVN Maven on my path, so I can access it just with MVN. So I can do Maven clean install to do our very first build from the command line. I see a few warnings here, which I'm going to ignore for a second. I do have a terminal in IntelliJ, which I'm not using. I use VI mode on my terminal here, and it doesn't quite work as well inside IntelliJ. Hitting escape, switches windows and things. So I'm pretty much going to ignore the terminal inside IntelliJ. Feel free to use it. I'm just going to use iTerm2, which is what this terminal is over here. Just a little bit better functionality for me. I do have the Vim plugin installed as well, so as I type, you might see me kind of jumping around a little bit. That's from the Vim plugin. Okay, so we've got our tutorial API. There is a Maven thing in here, so I can reload project and I can run various. Well, I thought I could run from here. Maybe I have to click on the POM. Yeah, run Maven. So you can kind of like over here how I did a Maven clean install. You can do that by right-clicking the POM and doing the same thing by clicking these. Which I'm pretty much just going to run Maven from the command line. Kind of keep my source code separate from my build. You can do it however you prefer. That's just what I've kind of gotten used to over time. So first things first, let's go ahead and talk about kind of what's going on here. So Maven has a bunch of different plugins, and you can see them listed here, like the clean plugin, the resources plugin, the compiler plugin. So Maven basically works through each of these plugins and performs actions based on them, and you can see the action here at the end. These are called goals. So like the Maven clean plugin has a clean goal, and what that does is you can see this target directory has been created to hold like the artifacts that we generate, like in this case this jar file we created, and some other like temporary things. And it'll have classes once we start writing Java code, and it compiles that Java code into class files. So all that temporary stuff is stored in the target directory. So when I do a Maven clean, it deletes those target directories, so that way when the install happens after that, then it will basically be starting fresh and regenerating all those temporary files. So if I do a git status now, I see the pom.xml file that we added. I also see this target directory that we added. And kind of like last time, I was saying we should ignore the .idea directory because that's auto-generated by our tools. Target is also auto-generated by our tool, so that's also something that we don't want to push up to GitLab. So I'm going to go ahead, or GitHub. So I'm going to open up this .gitignore file and add target in here. So now if I do that git status again, I see that gitignore has been modified. I see pom is my new file, and I don't see target any longer. Right, there's target's not listed here on my untracked files. Okay, so let me do that Maven clean install again and see these warnings. So I was talking about the plugins. This Maven resources plugin is complaining. And it's actually complaining in two places because the first time this plugin runs, it does the resources goal. The second time it does test resources. So it's running twice, and it's complaining both times about using a platform encoding. So if I come over here and do Maven resources plugin, click on goals, so I can see the resources goal here. Resources is the plugin, and then the second resources is the goal, and I see the test resources. So both of those goals we're invoking as part of our build. So the resources on the left of the colon comes from the name of the plugin, the shorthand name of the plugin, and then the resources on the right and the test resources on the right come from the goals on the right. So if I click on one of these, there are various required parameters and optional parameters. Now it says it's required, but I didn't specify any kind of plugin configuration, so it's defaulting. It's required, but if you don't specify it, it will use this default value. So if I look further down, I see optional parameters, and down inside here I see encoding, which defaults to project.build.source encoding, and I also see a properties encoding, which defaults to whatever you specify in your encoding up here. So to fix this warning, it's asking us to specify a platform encoding. So I'm going to take this and slide it over just a little bit, maybe to right here, so that I can see this project build encoding. I'm going to come over here into my POM and we'll add a properties section, and then we'll add this project.build.source encoding. In fact, I'm going to copy it so I don't botch the typing. And I'm going to specify the encoding of all source code in this project to be UTF-8. UTF-8 is a very common encoding, so I'm just going to use that here. You can pick something else if you're familiar enough with what that actually means, but generally UTF-8 makes sense. So now that we've specified a project.build.source encoding property, that this encoding will default to that, as it says here, and also this properties encoding will default to it also, since it defaults to encoding. So if I come back over here and do Maven clean install again, so those warnings disappeared. So now our resources plugin says that it's using the UTF-8 encoding like we told it to use. We are still getting a warning from our jar plugin, and it's complaining that our jar will be empty, which makes sense because we have no Java code that's being compiled into a Java archive, which is what jar stands for. So this warning makes sense, and we're not going to fix this just yet, but something that we'll fix in the future. I'll go ahead and pause here. The next thing we'll talk about in the next one is these plugin versions, and we'll start that in the next video. Thank you.